I'm really delighted to welcome to the TechJesse channel a very special guest. Those of you who have watched my video of my top 10 favorite games from the 90s know that my all-time favorite game is Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. Well, today I'm very pleased to welcome the creator of that game, Hal Barwood. Welcome, Hal.
Hi, everybody.
So I'll go ahead and start out with your biography. Hal Barwood is a writer, filmmaker, and a video game developer. He studied art at Brown University and the Rhode Island School of Design, later earning a Master of Fine Arts from USC's School of Cinema Television. He has teamed up with a former classmate of his by the name of George Lucas. I've heard of that guy on numerous projects, as well as Steven Spielberg, writing Spielberg's first theatrical feature film, The Sugarland Express, and contributed to the screenplay for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He later went to pursue a career in his second passion, video game design, and went to work at LucasArts, where he co-designed and wrote the critically acclaimed, what many call hands down, the greatest game ever made, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, along with many other projects. It is a great honor to welcome Hal Barwood. So thanks again for joining. And I'll start with the first question. Prior to working at LucasArts, what led you to that point in your career?
Well, I've retailed this story many times, and I'll do it again. But first, I just want to say that among the pals that I made when I was at USC Film School, and there are many, the one who was the most significant because we wrote screenplays together for 15 years is Matthew Robbins. And although George is a friend of long standing, more than 50 years, nevertheless, I only had peripheral contact with George in his professional life. So just want to set that record straight. Um, I was a screenwriter with Matthew for a long time, and we got the chance to make a movie. We thought it was going to be a big hit because it was unusual, it did visual effects, but it wasn't science fiction. It was Dragon Slayer, which is a fantasy, Iron Age fantasy about a young magician who has to try to get rid of a dragon. And it's kind of a thriller as opposed to an action movie. And it was a big project. We shot most of it in London. The special effects were done at Industrial Light and Magic, George's company. We were the very first independent production to come in and take advantage of the tremendous talent at ILM. And so they taught us a lot about how to think about effects and get them done right. And we taught them a lot about how to handle an independent production. It wasn't, part of George's empire. And part of that whole process was that we're in England. The days that you shoot are shorter. It's more difficult to get setups done. We had very elaborate sets. Elliot Scott, our wonderful production designer, built these fantastic sets for us. And so it was really terrific, but it was also hard work. And at one point, we needed to shoot a bunch of scenes at a Iron Age village. And we found out that you could go about 30 miles outside London and right near where our studio was at Ivor, Pinewood. And there was a place called Stalker's Farm. You could turn about 275 degrees and you wouldn't see any hint that you were really in a suburb of London. And so that was pretty cool. And we built huts there that were thatched with plenty of gasoline in the thatch so we could burn them when the dragon goes flying over. And we had to shoot some of this stuff at night. And night meant big towers with huge 10Ks and Klieg lights up there simulating moonlight. It was very difficult to get that set up and get the exposures correct so we could make it look really night, but also make it look so you could see everybody. And we couldn't get our first shot until around midnight. And then meanwhile, we're also revealing that the young guy who seems to be one of the principals of the movie is actually a girl. And we reveal that in the course of a complicated dance with a whole bunch of extras all wearing burlap. And after we got through making sure that they weren't wearing wristwatches and didn't have what the British called trainers on their feet, so that they looked pretty 20th century, we got going. And so Matthew is busy being the director, and I'm the producer. And this is in 1980. And had done my job. I had delivered the goods and services to the set, and Matthew was taking over to direct. And I discovered that I would have a lot more fun sitting alone in a trailer not far from the set. And instead of watching Matthew do all the directing of the actual sets, what should have been one of the great days of my life making movies, I thought it was much more interesting to sit alone in the trailer with my HP 41C calculator, the first alphanumeric display HP calculator, and train that thing how to play Hunt the Wumpus as a Dragon Slayer app. So I realized that, if this was true, then I was in the wrong business. And I also was very interested from early childhood in games of all kinds and very interested in computers. And in 1964, 16 years before 1980, in the summer after my first year at USC, my wife and I drove back east to where we grew up in Hanover, New Hampshire, which is the home of Dartmouth College and also my home and her home. And that was the first year that Thomas Kurtz and John Kemeny had developed a computer language called BASIC. It was done there at Hanover. And I got very interested in that. I got a manual, which was, this is so long ago, the manual was printed on a mimeograph. All the pages were purple. And I learned how to program in BASIC. And that started my whole interest in computer games right there. It started to mature later. And then in 1980, when I realized I've got to go do something else besides producing and writing movies, it took me 10 years to go from there to employment at LucasArts, which started in 1990.
Let's talk about LucasArts a little bit. How did you come up with the idea for the game of Fate of Atlantis, and how did that project come to be?
George's idea was that as ancillary income would be if we could do games based on movies that he was making. And so they did a movie about the famous chalice, and the third Jones movie, and three guys, Noah Falstein and Ron Gilbert and oh gosh, I'm spacing a little bit here. They were doing the spin-off game from the movie, and they were exhausted from that effort. It was tough. It was the first time that George really thought we had enough technical ability to do a decent game based on a movie, and it wouldn't just embarrass the whole Lucasfilm enterprise. And they worked very hard, and they got it done. But then it was very successful, and they wanted to do another one, but none of the three guys wanted to do it. And I've been, I'm a friend of George, and I was hanging around his company when he would, do stuff. And I met some of these people long before I got there to work. And they thought, well, let's get Hal to come in and do a sequel, another Jones adventure game. And so I got hired. And Noah and I collaborated on the design. We were handed a screenplay for a possible fourth movie. And George didn't want to make that movie, nor did Steve. And but they thought it would be good enough for a game. And Noah and I looked it over, and we just thought, my God, this is awful. We just can't turn this into a game at all.
What was the subject of that screenplay?
The Monkey King, somewhere in Africa. And it just seemed to me that it didn't ring any cultural bells that would make it exciting to an American audience or even a whole world audience. And I just thought the screenplay was probably rejected as a possible movie for good reason. And so we thought and thought and thought. George had developed property out in Western Marin, 8,000 acres of Skywalker Ranch. And there were a lot of buildings out there. And for a while, the LucasArts, what was going to become LucasArts, we were all stationed out there. And George had a large library, a wonderful library, but primarily for the purpose of production design. So it had a lot of coffee table books and stuff that production designers would look at to get inspiration and references for designs for movies that were going to be made. And so Noah and I were wondering, what the heck are we going to do? Let's go look at some stuff. So we went to his library. We picked up a book, among others at first, called Mystic Places. This is it. And it's a wonderful book, Time Life Books. And we're looking through this thing to look for some kind of, ancient thing that went on that, would have some resonance in the modern world that we could turn into a story. And we came to this illustration,
It looks
which
familiar.
is which is an illustration from this book of the description of Atlantis turned into an illustration. And when we saw those concentric circles, we just thought, this is a game. And so from there, we had to go back and then, cook up a lot of characters and story items to make it all work. But that's how it happened.
That's awesome. Well, it all came together. I mean, it was brilliant. The team was wonderful. I mean, how did you help grow the team, or did who decided that, and how did it come together?
Noah was interested in doing something else. That's what the reason they hired me. But he had this idea. They got a lot of feedback from the previous game, and the feedback said that they had a lot of things going on in that game. They had fist fighting because they thought Jones had to do fist fighting, and because he does it in the movies. And they had a lot of puzzles that were tough. Ron Gilbert is a wonderful puzzle designer, and you know. David Fox was the third guy who was working on that finally hit me, and they were great at doing these puzzles, but some of them were really tough, and audiences, people would complain about that, and some people thought that they wanted a warmer, humane experience when they were playing this game. And so Noah thought, hey, I've got this idea which will do 3 paths to go through the game, and one will emphasize puzzling, one will emphasize fisticuffs, and one will emphasize kind of cooperative progress. And then Noah went off to work on another project, and Hal Barwood got left to make all that stuff work. So, which I did. But it was so tricky and it was so complicated to do it. We found that in order to maximize our resources and stay within this ability to get the game done, we had to take elements and find ways to, put them into the different paths using different puzzle techniques and different things going on, but overlapping some of the resources we had. So you find that if you're on the puzzle path, you're going to encounter a lot of the same stuff you encounter on the path with Sophia, but in different ways. And we also realized that this was really taxing us, and so we decided that once you get to Atlantis itself, all the paths converge, and we just did one version of the huge third section of the game where you're going through Atlantis itself.
I remember playing through all 3 paths fondly as a 10-year-old on my Macintosh Color Classic. It had an 8.2-inch viewable screen, and I was mesmerized by it. I mean, it sparked a sense of adventure that lasted me a lifetime. I really do think it had a profound effect on shaping my life. I mean, I've been to places in the world that I wouldn't have traveled to likely if it weren't for that game, and
Wow.
and now it's fun to be able to share that with my boys. I've got two young kids, 9 and 11, and they wanted a new game, and I said, no, you can't get another game. They were playing Minecraft and they wanted a different game, and I said, you can't play. I won't get you another game unless you beat Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. And so they gladly played through it and really enjoyed it, and it's really
Like
cool to
my
see.
kids stayed up all night to play that game. I think that's what that made them proud of their father, and I was very grateful for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, what a lot of people say that it should have been the 4th movie. Instead, we got stuck with those stupid aliens. I don't know what the heck how that was chosen
Yeah.
as the movie, but it really should have been. I've shared with you some of the comments that were made on my video where I listed it as my number 1 favorite game, and overwhelming. People were agreeing. They were saying hands down was the word that people were using, if you recall.
That's,
And
that's that's wonderful to hear, and I have heard that before as well. Of course, you can't help it. But you have to understand that George and Steve would never uh, make a movie that had already appeared in some commercial form
Mm,
previously. So there was no
that's
chance it
true.
was ever going to be the fourth movie. As to Aliens, that's a different story. And I made another Jones game, which is actually my favorite Jones game, called Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine.
Mm,
And it's an action adventure game, LucasArts' first 3D game, and action adventure game. We had done one other, and we adopted the engine, which was primitive, to do a third person action adventure game from a Star Wars game. And the whole point of that was that when I was thinking about getting Lucas, arts into the whole world, we were a little bit behind the power curve because another company had come along to kind of exploit the Jones kind of genre with Tomb Raider. And of course, I'm a big
mm,
fan of Tomb Raider. I can't help it. But nevertheless, I wanted to take back that franchise. And so we got going, and I wanted to do a story which George had told me a little bit about, which was, encountering aliens. And I thought that was a pretty good idea because it allowed us to get rid of the Nazis, probably. And I was when I proposed a scenario, the LucasArts administration sent that off to Lucasfilm, and they wrote back and said, "Don't go there."
uh, so they already were
And
planning it.
yeah, so you know what finally happened, and the problem is that I had a much better idea for an alien
They
story
should have
than
hired you.
Crystal Skull. Crystal Skull's awful, so
Yeah,
and
yeah, we definitely agree on that. Well, it was pretty neat being able to actually thank Spielberg for his contribution to the Indiana Jones franchise and shaping my life. I was a extra on that film. If you recall the terminal, I was one of the guys walking around in the background. You could see me, I think, blurry, zipping by. But I spent about 2 weeks on that set, and the last day I walked up to Spielberg and shook his hand and said, "Hey, thank you for Indiana Jones and for all that you've done to help shape my childhood." And that
wow.
was really cool, and it's neat being able to thank you as well for your contribution. And yeah, I wanted to ask you also. There was a sequel planned. Now, I read for Fate of Atlantis. What happened to that? What can you tell us about that?
Not very much. It wasn't really a sequel. It was just another Jones adventure. One of the nice things about the world of Jones is differentiated from Star Wars. Over time, the people who are now in charge of Star Wars at Disney have figured out a way to continue to exploit that franchise. But it was hard at first because Star Wars is a continuing narrative that goes continuously through three movies in the beginning, and so that on foreign planets, completely different sci-fi cultures going on that have nothing to do with Earth, and so it's very hard to figure out how you're just going to have stories with independence. But Indiana Jones takes place in an exaggerated version of our world, and and you can always come up with another adventure. Each one lives on its own. So I thought that was a terrific advantage for the Jones franchise. And the problem is that no one else, I didn't want to do another one. And nobody else, there was a senior person there. There were other guys that were wanted to jump into the world of design and run projects. But they were struggling to come up with a scenario that would work. Anyway, we never did complete another one, but of course there are fragments of ideas about it that float around, and I get asked about this, but nothing ever really came close to getting done, except that much later, uh, under a whole different administration after I left the company, um, uh, external studios were getting ready to start doing Jones games.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting.
And
It's
they
in the
did.
'90s. it was all about the push for graphics and technology and who can make it look the best. And they seem to start to miss on gameplay as the years went on, especially into the early 2000s. And now there's that trend going back. The technology is already pretty much all there. I mean, there's certain advancements that are being made, but it's you look at Minecraft, the most successful game of all time, and it's pixelated 90s style
But
graphics, and it's really great gameplay. And I've got my kids playing several modern retro style adventures, and it's really neat to see a resurgence of that style. And yeah, really
no,
looking at
Minecraft is hugely successful. I have a grandson who's busy with another team online, and they build a very complicated railroad that goes
mm,
on. It's just amazing,
yeah.
and other stuff like that. It's fascinating to watch what they can do, and of course, it's all 8-bit, which is fun. And I have to say, um, Fate of Atlantis, here's a funny story. David Fox, who was one of the creators of the previous Jones game from the third film, um, we had to decide. Technology was developing in lots of ways, and part of it was tools and equipment, and it became possible to have a scanner where you could have the artists do artwork and then scan it. And the problem was that the scanner, which was they were getting ready to maybe buy one as I was getting ready to do Fate, and but it cost $5,000, and that
Mm,
was a big capital jump for tiny little LucasArts at that time. So my game all got done in deep paint. Boy, was
yeah.
I annoyed, because all the next games never got near deep paint again. We were the very first game that came through LucasArts that had 256 colors. Wow.
Yeah, it was beautiful at the time, especially on that 8.2-inch screen. I couldn't notice if there were any
Yeah,
imperfections.
yeah. Things when things are small like that, they look
Yeah.
good. But
Prior to
nowadays,
Mhm.
yeah, nowadays, both Fate, which I played recently because of another interview, actually, but so I've been through it again, and Infernal Machine, which neither game could I look at really for years and years and years, especially Infernal Machine, because that kind of technology advanced so rapidly once it got going, that our ability to maybe push 5,000 polys a frame in Infernal Machine, that became outdated so fast that the game looked really old
Mm.
within a year, and so I couldn't look at it. But then many years later, I finally went back and I played through it again, and I just thought, wow, this is great, and it looks fine. It just looks retro, so it's
Mm.
fine. Same thing with Fate.
So prior to joining LucasArts, you created games for the Apple II. Tell me about some of those.
Well, I did too, actually. This is my learning experience. Um, like a lot of people, of course, I got myself a personal computer once they were around in the early 70s, and started thinking about stuff. And you could use BASIC on those computers right away, but it was obvious to me that BASIC was incapable of actually having enough oomph to produce a game. You couldn't write a game in BASIC and make it work. But I did do a little thing called binary gauge, a model railroad in BASIC, and even then it was not going to work. But at that time Microsoft came out with something called TASC, the AppleSoft compiler, and that turned BASIC into a compiled language, and it did speed it up, but by about a factor of 12, and that was pretty good. But then I really wanted to do a real serious, like, semi RPG kind of game, and I thought, well, I'm never going to get there with BASIC. If I work on that in BASIC, I'll just get nowhere. So I taught myself assembly language. And the first thing I did is, it was a tile-based game. It was 20 by 10 tiles, which fit really nicely on a Apple screen. And it's called Space Snatchers. It's a science fiction game. a human being gets kidnapped by aliens and has to escape from this vast ship. And it's a huge game, even though it's, all takes place in 64K. But I thought, well, okay, I've got this tile system. I've learned some assembly language, and I'm going to hit this button, which converts the Apple II from showing me low res text to bang, the high res screen. So I hit the key and I predicted what would happen. I thought, this is going to be so fast that I'll just see this little wave as the tiles change from one set to another. And it'll be almost invisible. And I hit the button and I thought something had gone wrong because all the tiles were just there. Bang. So suddenly everything was about, 1,000 times faster than basic, something like that. And I could write a game which had a little bit over 4 frames a second animation. And at that time, the only way you could possibly do it was the 6502 assembly language. And I just pulled every trick you can pull in assembly language to get that to work. I even wrote a little kind of a movie system inside so that I could do cutscenes.
That's awesome. Are those games still available anywhere?
On my website.
All right.
There are wonderful emulators for the Apple II.
I'll go ahead. I'll link that in the description of this video as well.
It's Apple Win is the one that I've got posted up there. But along the way, this is all on 5 1/4 floppies at first. But somewhere along the way, when I was at LucasArts, I started to realize that if I don't get going, this game will vanish forever. And so I figured out that we had a guy in the sound department at LucasArts who had hooked up a Mac so that it could read 5 1/4 inch discs and then translate them onto the 3 1/4, 3.5 ones, whatever the little ones are, those not quite so floppy. And so we were able to read off all the disk information on these other disks, and then from there, we had another guy who was able to take those on a Mac and get them turned into just text files on a PC. So suddenly I have files. And after quite a lot of work, I was able to get everything to work properly on a PC, and it plays just fine on Windows 11.
Other than Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, are there any other projects that you worked on that you're particularly proud of that people should check out that maybe are lesser known?
I mean, at Lucas, I was very. I also did 3 other games that I was interested in. I'll tell you about 2 of them. One is called Big Sky Trooper, which is also a big game that's on a little 1 megabyte cart for the SNES and Nintendo SNES, and it's an RPG, and it's a wonderful game, but. And it's an original. We weren't using IP from some other, it wasn't Jones or Star Wars. So I kind of like that. And the problem is that when we came out, we have this 1 megabyte cart, and Donkey Kong, whatever the hell, which version of it came out with like a 32 meg cart, which Nintendo could afford. This is long before PlayStation came along and you could do all this stuff on CDs and DVDs, and instead of manufacturing them in Asia and sending them over in containers, you could ship them by rail from Mexico, and so it was a pretty tough thing for us to get that done at all, and it was a very, very difficult development process because we had trouble finding people who could actually do the coding that was necessary to get a SNES game to work. And I did some of it, and we were rescued toward the end by Tony Hsieh, who came back. He was at LucasArts, worked on Fate, but then left the game business actually for a while, and then came back from briefly, and he took over, and he was a terrific 6502 coder and got that game done for us. The other game that is worth mentioning, which is still around, you also can play that on my website, is called Yoda Stories. It's a little tile-based game, and it was done back in the days when there was no such thing as a casual game. You know, all games had to be these immense, long, many hours of play kinds of games, or you couldn't sell them for the prices that we needed to sell them at in order to be able to make a little money. And I chafed about that because I like to do story games and I like to play games, but I like to be able to kind of, kind of knock it off and say that I've got something done and go on to something else. And so in Yoda Stories, there are like 15 scenarios. It's all tile based, and each time you play, the game builds a new world with different puzzles, all connected up, and you get to do one of 15 scenarios. And even if you repeat that scenario, the puzzle will all be kind of different. Now, how different? Well, it's a little bit like the world of chess, where each game is vastly different, but you're still doing everything on 64 squares, and all the pieces look the same. So, a lot of the materials of the game look the same, but you're actually having a new adventure every time you play. You can still do it. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. And you've also written several novels, if you want to share about some of those.
Yes, I made my living as a writer for more than half a century professionally. First, movies. Um, I never took a writing class really about creative writing, but I trained at USC as an animator, and that's my background in art, is painting and animation. And but when I came of age and left USC, it's in a period of time when animation was almost completely dead. Disney's fortunes were flagging. They didn't seem to be able to turn out movies that were hits anymore. They weren't hiring. Hanna-Barbera was doing some stuff, and you could do Rocky and Bullwinkle, and that was about it. And so I realized that I wasn't going to get very far, and I wound up, my first job was at a company called Graphic Films. We did industrial movies. That the equivalent today would be working as a web jockey, somewhere, and turning out stuff for companies that needed that kind of thing. And so Matthew and I got interested in writing, and we found out, we got very lucky. I mean, everywhere you're in a creative endeavor and you have a career, it always means that behind it all, there's some lucky break that happened. And we did get a lucky break. We got an agent before we'd actually written our first script. And so we had some cachet even before we got going. And by the time we'd written our eighth script, we actually got a movie made, which is Sugarland Express. And so we taught ourselves how to write as screenwriters. And I did that for almost 20 years. And then I'd spent 30 odd years in the game business, one way or another. And during this whole time, I had this itch to just write. And one of the nice things about writing for the page is that you can produce finished goods on your own without having a team behind you. And that's a terrific thing if you're, kind of an old man living in a condo somewhere. So I've written 10 novels and three books for kids. My 10th novel isn't quite published yet. It'll be out, kind of in December. Called Short Sellers. Anyway, it's a standalone. It's about how financial shenanigans lead to a mysterious death, and a cousin of the murder victim, or a victim who decides thinks it's a murder. The cops don't think it's even a murder, natural death and heart attack. And so he tracks down the how it all happened. It's anyway. I'm hoping people will see it and like it and read it.
All right, looking forward to checking it out. I'm really appreciative of you joining me here and sharing your stories. And I think we may have talked about It would have been about 30 years ago in circa 1995. I ran up about a $250 long distance phone bill to LucasArts, and I was bugging all of the programmers there and different people when I was about 12 years old.
Oh my gosh.
I remember talking to Tim Schafer for sure. I talked to Sean Clark, and I actually wrote a sequel to the game Full Throttle that I had written, and I was faxing it in and bugging all these people. And I think you may have been one of the ones, so I apologize for distracting you from work when I was 12.
Oh
But
my gosh, don't apologize. I'm sure it was great, and I'm glad you got a chance to chat with Tim and Sean. Sean and I worked together quite a bit. I never did actually work with Tim, and although I'm a huge admirer of Full Throttle, it was one of those stories at LucasArts where it's a terrific game, and of course I've played it and enjoyed it. But what's really interesting is it was kind of a breakthrough game. It was a way of getting away from some of the deep stuff that was going on in a more primitive display system. But there are only really 12 puzzles in that whole game.
it was very quick. I actually had I played through it, and then had one of my boys play through it, and we beat it in a few hours. But it was
It's
fun.
got a terrific sense of character, and Tim's a terrific, and he and Grossman are just fantastic.
It was an amazing team out there that really developed just some wonderful content. As you can see from the decorations behind me, I am quite the connoisseur of
I see
retro
something in
games.
the background there that looks familiar.
Yeah, that's my Pentium 3. It's a Dell 4100 running Windows 98, and then I've got a Pentium 4 with Windows XP with that black Sony Trinitron that you see back there, and that
Yeah.
that there's some good times. We actually have get-togethers. I've built a little network of friends. We call ourselves the Northern California Retro Computing Guild, and there's about 24 of us now, and we get together and actually hold retro LAN parties, and it's all on original 90s hardware. So yeah, if you're ever
Um,
down here sometime, you'll have to check us out.
the last time I actually, I thought, I'm interested in computers. I'm fascinated by them, of course. And so at one point I thought, I got to build one. Everybody builds a PC, so I'll do it. And so I built one years ago. It ran Windows 98, and I also built one for my older son who used it to do some 3D stuff. But nowadays that just seems like what cavemen used.
But they run the oldies perfectly, and the new machines don't. So yeah, it was. I got frustrated. I wanted to run some old games, and they wouldn't run on the new systems.
That's another subject that's sort of dear to my heart, which is emulators.
Hmm.
The thing to remember is, or at least this is a good kind of an anecdote. Uh, Hemoglobin, which is how we deliver oxygen to all our tissues in our blood, is more conserved. Is more hemoglobin today is less different from hemoglobin 400 million years ago than the rocks of the earth.
Hmm.
How do we do it? Well, it's because of constant reproduction. And the way to keep old games going is to get emulators that can continue to get that stuff moved over and continue to play it. It's the only hope, and that's why you can still play Space Snatchers because there's a wonderful set of emulators. There's more than one, but the one that I use all the time is called Applewin, and it's just terrific. Somebody just volunteered to make a PC version of the Apple II. It's fantastic. And there are a lot of other emulators around as well. And a guy named Aaron Giles does something called Dream, DREAMM,
Hmm.
which will emulate all the old LucasArts games, including mine.
Yeah, there's some really great emulators out there that do the hardware emulation. There's a something called PCM. There's also the Mister is another one. I'll have to do a video on those as well, and just focus on
I think
emulation.
that's the way of preserving. What we've got. Luckily, technology is simpler in the world of film. So there was a period of time when studios just didn't give a damn about old movies. they just didn't care because there was no way to make any money with them, except every now and then an art theater like the New Art down in LA would, get some old movie and rerun it. And back in our student days, that's how we got to see a lot of old movies, is keep checking on what's going on at the 2 or 3 art theaters in town and run off in the middle of the night and go see a movie. And, but of course, eventually, first videotape and then DVDs got going. And suddenly all the studios thought, oh my God, we can make money on our old stuff. And so now they want to preserve all that. Thank God.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah, these will all
because
go these will go to e-waste. I know the kids will have no appreciation for them, and that'll be it. I actually found them mostly at the dump. It's funny because my group of friends, we take pictures whenever we're at the dump. Anyone want this? Oh, look what I snagged. And we've got this now ecosystem of old retro hardware that we're fixing up. And I've got a whole lab set up to replace capacitors and, and keep it running. And it's not viable in the long term, that's for sure. Any closing thoughts that I didn't hit on that you
no,
like that?
it's nice to chat with you, and I'm glad that you have a kind of an obsession for this sort of thing. Me
And there,
too.
I'm not alone. I think all the guys in our 40s and 50s were now we've got kids of our own, many of us, and we want to share it with the next generation. And especially as we approach retirement, we've got a lot of nostalgia for this stuff, and I think it's going to only get more popular in the next 10 or 20 years. So
I hope that's true. Anyway,
yeah,
it's very nice to chat with you.
thank you for sharing and joining, Hal. I really appreciate it. Have a great
Bye
day.
for now.